This session, our third session of the day, is focused on how fintech can help governments tackle fraud, error and debt. And the context, I guess, very topical because we know during the pandemic, for example, that lots of governments struggled with kind of fraud in terms of COVID payments during the pandemic. This is an issue. I think it's yet to be analysed exactly how much that has cost governments, but I think it will be kind of eye-watering amounts. But even before the pandemic, the issues of kind of fraud and error stretch across, everything from bribery to corruption to kind of payments and grants, procurement, all of those issues. So what we're looking at today, and we'll hear some examples and some expertise on this, is how might fintech solutions help governments to reduce these issues, whether that's looking at different ways of kind of data, analytics, or different other kind of fintech solutions that are out there. So, as we always kind of run short on this, and I do again, I'm going to be looking to the audience at the end to pose as many of your questions as you possibly can. I'm going to invite Ewan to give us the first opening comments.
Thank you. Lovely to be here in person and to see such a turnout. So again, just thank you to everyone for your time. By way of introduction, I'm Ewan Slack. I head up digital products within the grants management function of Cabinet Office. I've been there for what seems like a very fast 18 months. One of the things that I've been excited to deliver within the grants function has really been grants within UK government have been ripe for digital transformation. Historically, grants management has been fragmented across government. It has not used digital tools to manage applications, payments, but that is now something we are beginning to change. And one of the key products that I lead and develop is an automated due diligence tool that we have called Spotlight. Now, what Spotlight is, by name, it automates a lot of manual and time-consuming due diligence checks that you would hope and expect to be conducted when giving out taxpayers' money. So we use companies' house data, charities commission, we use data from external providers such as Experian to check non-limited businesses, so we can get and provide a department with good coverage of anyone that's trying to apply for and receive a grant or contract. One of the benefits and key features of Spotlight is being built on a centralised platform and then being licensed out across government. We are breaking down departmental silos when it comes to grant contract applications and the data associated with them. So what we now have is what could be really analysed as big data over the past 2 years since COVID hit. We're approaching 1 million applications through the tool, over £20 billion worth of grant value that's gone through it. And recently supporting the energy rebate scheme, we've seen 1 million applications processed within a month on our bank account verification functionality. So what Spotlight's very good at is, like I say, gathering a lot of data, providing risk indicators against those data points to hopefully make that award decision more informed and quicker and in real time. Where I think it can go next, and sort of leading in to some fintech solutions, is what we probably need to do more of is understand the networks, the corporate networks that applications are attached to. Now that can be at a simple entity resolution level of a small UK company structure, or actually taking that out to a really large international network with ties to country X, Y, and Z. The technology is quite easy, we think, to harness. The big challenge next really for government is upskilling and taking the users with us on that journey. We can gather the data, we can present it to them, but then I think actually educating the government users on what risk looks like, how to manage that, will be quite a different challenge. Jerome from Context is going to be speaking, who we've sort of worked closely with in different parts in the Cabinet Office. But I think things like their entity resolution, the way they are able to look at and risk profile networks in different parts of a corporate structure, look like really valuable bits of functionality. We can then look at, if we go forward, we have bank account verification. So, okay, who are we paying? Is it the person that we expect to pay? But then things like open banking, blockchain, where does that money go after it's left the system? I think are things that we can probably look to harness in the future. I think that will do me.
Thank you very much, Ewan. A really nice place to start, because as you say, it links in nicely to our next speakers. But I apologise, I didn't introduce you, and I didn't introduce the panel. So in case you missed, that was Ewan Slack, who's head of Spotlight at the Cabinet Office in the United Kingdom. And then we will hear from Jerome Brissink, who is Director of Government Solutions for Quantexa, and then Alex Chekalov, who is Senior Expert for Audit Authority at the Ministry of Finance in Latvia. And last but not least, we will hear from Valentina Ion again, who's Director of Strategy for Business Strategy for Microsoft. So, Jerome, you were name checked there. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jerome. My experience over the last 15 years has been working with tax and benefits departments, a bit everywhere over Europe, Asia, the US, and Canada, always in a very specific sector, always deploying systems to look at fraud and non-compliance. So the thing that we do is very simple, actually. It is just connecting all of the different data to create a unified view. Then creating scores, creating networks, and making that available to investigators and support them in their work. Now, when I say we, actually we enable those agencies to do that with technologies, and we make sure that they're self-sufficient with the technologies. Now, in the quick discussion today, I wanted to talk quite quickly on the opportunities and threats of digitalization as we see that for those different agencies. But before I go there, I was thinking I would tell you a quick story of a project that we did actually during the COVID pandemic, during the first lockdown. So it was, when we were all home, the economy was in trouble, and the government of that particular tax agency had just agreed on some measures, COVID-19 measures, that would be paid out to the companies. And there was a bit of a panic, because we literally had 4 weeks to process 100,000 of claims from companies that were asking for money back from the government. So just imagine having to process those claims, and where do you start? You cannot really do an audit because you cannot physically go to the companies. Everyone is in lockdown. You can pick up your phone and ask them questions, but if it's a fraudster, he's prepared, and he will answer and give you a very good impression. So what we had to do there is take all of those claims, connect it to all the other rest of the data that the tax department had, and then surface the ones with the highest risk, with the highest probability of networks that were connected. We had a couple of very interesting cases, so most likely organized crime, creating 40, 50 companies, all connected together and all claiming COVID-19 measures. Now, if you're interested, I can show you that case during the break. It's really interesting how prepared those companies were. So you can see that they were created 2 or 3 years ago. So the fraudsters already had those companies and were waiting for an opportunity to use those companies for any type of fraud, right? But then they just saw an opportunity in COVID-19. Now, in that case here, fortunately, we were able to work before the payments, suspend those payments, and then move those cases to criminal investigation quite quickly. which we believe also disrupts the organizations in the long term. Now, I think one of the key success factors here was that the organization was prepared. Right? We were already working with quite some time with that organization on other problems, other fraud and compliance problems, so all the data was already there, already available, and then we only had to spend 1 or 2 days taking the claims, connecting the claims to all the rest of the information, and coming up with the very high-risk claims, which really enabled to spend the rest of the 3 weeks on looking at the results and deciding which one would be suspended or not. Now, which brings me to really the opportunities and threats that I think we are seeing in fraud and compliance linked to digitalization. I think on the threat side, like you can see from the example here, we have much less contact with people, right? Through digitalization, all of those physical contacts with the agencies are disappearing. So that also means less control by people over the process. We can also see that now with the fraud that's becoming much more international, it's possible to defraud an agency without even going into the country. Right? So the fraudster doesn't have to be physically in the country. They can do everything either using some local people or a lot of it happening in the digital world. So that prospect is quite scary in a way, and you can imagine a situation where the benefit system would be overwhelmed with fake refunds, the tax system would be overwhelmed with fake organization claiming money, which brings me to the opportunity, which I believe is that there's so much data now available that we can really form a very good picture, and it becomes much more difficult for those fraudsters, companies, and physical people to misrepresent their situation and to fraudulently claim those benefits or claim that they don't have to pay some sort of tax. So that's really the opportunity that in all the data that we have now, there is most likely one piece of data that will surface the fact that actually there is some sort of misrepresentation. So yes, I think that was pretty much what I wanted to cover in this very quick introduction.
Thank you so much, Jerome. I mean, really interesting, because obviously what Ewan started is government, you're doing a certain level of this, but then working with companies like yourself can do that next step in kind of linking up to those corporate networks. And really interesting to have that case study from COVID, and also I think how you can come in and with limited resources that government have, really help them identify where the highest risk is, maybe, so if they want to target their resources. So lots to go on there as well. I'm sure that will resonate with the audience too. Alex, over to you.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. I'm really happy to be here because I see that it's a really rare opportunity to discuss how Fintech can help governments. I should, from the start, tell something about my authority and work we perform. So I represent Audit Authority. We are second-level financial control of EU funds, and the main product we produce is assurance to the European Commission and to the society that expenditure of EU funds is legal, regular, without irregularities, and we can approve and we can declare payments to the European Commission. So it's our main goal. And of course, we are looking for some innovative and most probably we even don't know about such a solutions. So I would like to stress first point, which I addressed, that we really lack of knowledge and lack of competence in the public authorities. Now I mean especially controlling authorities. So we really don't know what kind of fintech solutions we can use to reach our goal. For example, to identify conflict of interest, corruption risks, fraud risks, double financing risks, and a lot of risks, for example, in public procurement. So we, as auditors, we really know well what are types of risks and what we're really looking for when we perform our compliance check. However, we might really don't know anything about possible solutions, and to invest our time, for example, to really verify most risky public procurements. Second point is that, in my opinion, there is really thin line between best practice and failure in implementing fintech or other IT solutions in control of expenditure, because in my opinion there is a really high risk if we are talking about EU fund system of overlapping of the databases, of the functions. For example, in EU funds we have Arachne system, which is really promoted by the European Commission, and some of the solutions we might implement on national level might be also implemented on EU level. And here is a discussion, a place for discussion that in our opinion also there should be involved EU institutions in such discussions to avoid this overlapping of functions of national databases and of EU level databases and solutions. Because we have not a lot of information from EU services like European Commission or also European Court of Auditors. So what are their plans? Maybe they already have planned to implement some really good solutions, and then we will now invest in our national systems or solutions. Next point is involvement of the civil society. I haven't heard about this point previously today, but in my opinion it's really significant as we also follow what is in OECD reports, and we can see that in OECD reports tendency is quite bad, so trust to governments is declining, is low, or both. So it shows that trust to government is quite on low level. It's not only in Latvia, but it's quite worldwide. Maybe exemption is really North countries. It's, for example, it's quite low also in Belgium. But in my opinion, civil society can also be a controller also of EU funds expenditure. And what I mean, if open data, which we have, for example, Public Procurement Monitoring Bureau, in Excel file, if this data would be really good visualized, as auditors we can provide typical risks, and for example it will be visualized for the society, I believe that journalists and other competitors on the market, they will raise awareness on really significant cases. And it also might help for the controlling authorities, because we should and it will be possible to really address most high-risk areas. And other point, number 4, is also that we understand that for different type of projects, we have different type of risks. So, for example, if we have infrastructure project, of course, there will be a risk in public procurement area, but if we're talking about social aid projects, the risks are, for example, did they really participate? Is there the effect of the some studies, some courses for the people? So risks are completely different, and I believe that solutions which might be also will be completely different. And once again, we are talking about these different actors, different levels. So EU level, some, for example, EU national, EU funds national level, and also level of particular authorities who control or are involved in EU funds implementation. And we should avoid this overlapping of information, databases, and investments. So these are some of significant points, in my opinion. And also, the last point, in my opinion, is that we should also implement IT fintech solutions, most preferably in system which already exists. So, as I know, also is position of European Court of Auditors, so trying to not to make, let's say, a revolution and to cancel our existing databases, existing solutions, but make improvements and make evolution of existing systems, once again, to avoid this expenditure, not efficient spend of expenditure. So that's some points about barriers which we are facing to make some solutions, and an example what we also have found and what we promote right now in Latvia. We, as auditors, found quite typically, it's not maybe a very big number of cases, but let's say in each our sample, we found approximately one conflict of interest from 15 projects, I mean, public procurements, and why it's significant in EU fund, because 100% financial correction for conflict of interest, like for fraud, for example. And sometimes it's also not because really procurement committee members will, let's say, fraudsters involved or something. They maybe just even haven't known that they have connection, or they were not good instructed. And what we offered from our side to develop in e-procurement possibility to receive this information from national databases, and in such way not only rely on declarations, but then procurement committee members will be checked via national databases on typical links, which information is available, and in such way we don't punish public procurement authorities. We help them, because if they will find conflict of interest in due time, then can then done mitigating actions, and the situation will be really addressed, and then there will be no financial correction, and also the transparency also will be followed. So, because in Latvia we have some financial corrections on conflict of interest, what also our authority found, so it's millions. It's 2 million, 14 million, so it's a really huge amount of money, and just to, if we will be able to really finish this improvement in e-procurement system, I believe it will help not only for the controllers, but also for the contracting authorities themselves. Thank you. That's
Brilliant.
My remarks.
Thank you so much, Alex. I mean, really honest assessment, I think, of where some of the barriers are, and I think other countries will really have similar, I think, issues facing them. So I think you kind of reflected what Ewan had said, kind of the lack of knowledge maybe and understanding amongst kind of officials in various parts of government about what fintech solutions are even available. This issue of how do you avoid duplication or overlapping of solutions at national EU level and maybe potentially international level as well. And then again, that recurring theme that we've had today, trust in government declining, and how do you address that when it comes to implementing some of these potential solutions. But despite all of those barriers, really good to hear that you are kind of progressing in particular areas, and good to have that case study of the e-procurement system that you're bringing in. Thank you very much, Alex. Valentina, over to you.
Yep. 5 messages or ideas that I would like to share with you. First of all, going back to the magnitude of the challenge in terms of fraud, error, as well as corruption, waste, and debt. The top areas where we see this challenge, VAT fraud, and tax fraud in general, and even before the pandemic, at EU level, there were more than 15 billion evaluated in terms of tax gap. With the pandemic, that has accelerated. Benefits, the economic stimulus packages that countries as well as European Union have made available, and we've heard about EU funds allocation. Globally, in the first year of the pandemic, there were more than 9 trillion euros allocated to such packages. So you can imagine fraudster interest for this and the loss that government faced when having to compute millions of requests daily at the country level, and Jerome was touching on that point as well. And then corruption, it's another angle, and World Economic Forum and World Bank are estimating that more than 3.2 trillions are lost due to corruption, and only that amount will, if recovered, will eradicate poverty, will allow access to education and good living conditions for all the countries on the world. So it's a huge, huge problem. Now, how can we tackle this, and how can technology enable this? It's extremely important to have a 360-degree view of the entities, taxpayers, citizens, businesses that are engaging with the government, either in terms of tax and revenue collection or in terms of economic stimulus packages. And the first aspect of that is entity resolution, and both you and Jerome were talking about understanding that transaction and that requests. Does it come from the same group of company? Is it just a different denomination used? The other aspect of building this 360-degree view, it's data collaboration, secure data collaboration, government to government, but also government to private sector. And that is now possible, and but it requires a will to collaborate, to move away from silos. And there are low-hanging fruits and data sets that are closer to open data classification. And once you pilot it, you learn from it, you gain trust also on the technology that enables this, you move to more sensitive type of data here. Once you have the 360-degree view of these entities, you can leverage the analytics capabilities powered by machine learning, artificial intelligence, in order to understand where the anomalies lie in the behavior of these entities. And it might be a good anomaly, or it might be a bad intentions anomaly. And that can be leveraged in two big directions. One, it's personalization of services. And I'll refer again to the economic stimulus packages. There were so many funds allocating to different programs, but not all of the programs have been consumed at the same way. So being able to assess and readjust the budget allocation and move from a program that's not reaching the interest of the economy to the programs where there's a lot of demand, is extremely important. And of course, the other aspect of these real-time insights and analytics, it's audit and segmentation, risk profiling, and we've heard from my co-panelists on this importance, on the importance of this. So that was another angle that I wanted to raise. And personalization of services also means a different strategy, or a personalized strategy in terms of communication, government to private sector. And I'll take Australia example, where they are segmenting their taxpayer base into low touch, high touch, and with the intermediate levels. Low touch, they're paying on time, there are no errors or very few errors submitted, so they can do self-service, and there are self-service channels made available to them. High touch, they might be struggling to pay in full or in time, or they have fraudulent behavior that's being flagged, and that requires a deeper level of engagement, or even offering additional services like financing services if it's a matter of cash flow and struggling to pay the tax duties. And the fifth point, it's the technology to enable this. I was mentioning earlier in the day confidential computing that now helps mitigate and remove the trade-off between privacy and security. Both can be achieved leveraging confidential computing. Artificial intelligence and machine learning specifically for that anomaly detection, but also profiling and segmentation of the entity basis. And I fully agree with Andres. He was mentioning that technology, it's just a tool. It is just a tool. It's not the scope in itself. The objective, it's compliance. The objective, it's the well-being in the economy and the society. So artificial intelligence needs to be explainable. Artificial intelligence needs to be ethical. It shouldn't be a black box and we don't know what's in there. And it should be mindful of the biases that might exist in the data sets that we have harnessed in the past. And through this ecosystem data collaboration, those biases can be removed because you get different perspective and closer to the reality. And we've heard from Ukraine, and I think Ukraine showed and accelerated actually investments that any country is making on cybersecurity, on protecting the data, not only the government data, but also the individual's data. There were so many identity theft cases, so looking at account protection and educating as well the citizens against these threats, it's extremely, extremely important. These were the points I wanted to make.
Thank you, Valentina. I mean, really interesting stuff. That just as you set out the scale of this, so how much there is for governments to benefit if we can clamp down on kind of fraud and error in there, and then what you can do with that money that you save. So really improving public services around the world, alleviating poverty, for example, but also, as you say, the personalisation of services going forward, and then really bringing it back to looking at that technology. How can you achieve all of this, but making sure that that technology is explainable and ethical. I like what you say there, and being really mindful of potential biases built into those systems going forward. So lots of food for thought there. I am going to come to the audience in a minute, but we did mention, I think all of you have touched on kind of the pandemic in some way. I just want to say, obviously during that period, governments tried new ways of working. They were more creative. They did bring data sets together in a way that they probably hadn't done before. Just in your opinion, what do you think the legacy is going to be from this period in terms of governments maybe being more open to the use of fintech solutions? Ewan, I'm going to come back to you.
Yeah, interesting question. I think the legacy of COVID is that really when under pressure, systems can react at that stage. You know, we saw a period of delivery at a rapid pace that we hadn't really seen before, certainly in my lifetime of government transformation. If you look at some of the technologies that they did deploy, you know, Spotlight itself was designed because of exiting the European Union. It was there to help with the capability and capacity of administering EU grants. But actually, you know, this thing called COVID came along and its application could be expanded. So, you know, government did scale and apply the use of technology, certainly in that instance. If you look at what they did in HMRC with furlough specifically in that instance, there's a lot of positivities, a lot of positives even to take from it. But then underlying that, there's still some basics to fix when it comes to the adoption and actual use of those systems and technologies as well.
Thanks, Ewan. Alex, I'm going to come to you again because I want to get the national government perspectives first. But do you think that COVID period helped to address some of those barriers? Do you think it has deepened an understanding at least of what potential technological and fintech solutions can do?
I suppose that such an unexpected situation and react to the situation, of course, it's shown how it's significant to have risk-based controls. So we all had, let's say, this case study, what risk-based controls mean. So if you really don't have risk-based controls, you're in trouble. And COVID aid during COVID pandemic really shows how significant for the government it's not significant what kind of grants or funds. So is it COVID or is it EU funds or some national funds? How significant to have really risk-based verification when we can really produce the result effectively and address most risky area. And from one, hand, and from the other hand, to not to, let's say, make some unnecessary administrative burden. So it's two parts, and they goes together. And I believe really COVID is a real case for all of us to think and improve our risk-based controls.
Yeah, thanks. Jerome, have you noticed a shift in
I'm not sure I've noticed a shift. I've more noticed an acceleration, but a drastic one during COVID. So a lot of things that were going to take years in terms of deployments, in terms of agreeing on what data we wanted to use, how to get the data, a lot of that happened in a couple of weeks when normally it would have taken a couple of years.
Yeah.
So we saw that massive acceleration because of the pressure that digitalization was putting on the system.
Yeah.
Now the good news is that I haven't seen any major downside of any major issue with those projects that accelerated. So I guess that's pretty good news.
Yeah, right. Valentina, same.
Totally aligned with what has been said, and at Microsoft in the first 6 months of the pandemic, we've seen accelerated digital transformation that otherwise would have taken more than 2 years. So that's the first aspect. And then with digital transformation, there's a lot of additional benefits are being unlocked. One, it's financial inclusion. If we think of, it started with the grocery delivery to the elderly and vulnerable population, where you had the postal services coming together with volunteers, and then you had the e-commerce platform really opening up. And it's a new way of living. I mean, we are leveraging those type of services much more now, even after the pandemic. It's hopefully over. Financial inclusion, therefore, was the second aspect I wanted to highlight. And in general, it is about private-public cooperation, consultation that's focusing on value creation. I mean, we are facing the increased debt, and value creation, it's the way forward. And social value creation, it's extremely important. So connecting the economic stimulus packages to sustainability goals, it's one way of how this has been done. The other aspect, it's including in public procurement that government opens a criteria that's social value creation. So working with different providers and ranking higher those that will contribute to skilling, to new opportunities creation.
Thanks, Valentina. Right, I'm coming to the audience again. Who has a question? I love the fact that Ian's in the room, always ready with a question. Okay, I'm going to come to you, Ian.
Thanks, Siobhan. I don't know whether I'm spoiling you or worrying me, because I've got 3 this time.
Right.
But, so take your pick, all of you. But first, just about blockchain. I think Ewan mentioned blockchain a little bit, and I often hear blockchain mentioned in the sense of kind of tackling procurement, corruption, and those type of things. So probably one there for Ewan and Alex. Second question picks up on Valentina's example of Australia. Fascinating example, and I just wondered whether Jerome may want to. I thought that was probably an interesting example for him to pick up on, 'cause what I heard was that Australia is segmenting taxpayers into higher risk and lower risk, and I just wondered whether that kind of means that lower risk taxpayers are subject to less scrutiny, if that's a fair question. But I thought maybe, I don't know if Context or Microsoft even working on that example, but I was just keen to hear more how that segmentation happens, because I guess anyone can suddenly start to commit fraud regardless of their past behaviour. Which then brings me on to my third question, which is I'm seeking to get more of a sense of whether a lot of the solutions we're talking about, or that governments are potentially seeking to deploy, are more preventative in terms of getting in ahead of either could be people who may be about to be fraudulent or fall into debt personally. So it's using AI or whatever to try and guess that, or it's kind of retrospective. So it's, we've given them a grant and now we're going to use technology to assess how that grant has been spent. Sorry, Siobhan, that was actually three questions. So
That's right.
Over to you to filter those up.
Okay, well, I'm going to put all three questions to the panel, but you can answer one, two, or all of them. So on the use of blockchain, on segmenting taxpayers, I think that is really interesting. What does that mean in terms of how government then treats the citizens in different ways, and then the solutions being preventative rather than kind of after the event? Valentina, I'll start with you on any of those.
Yeah, I'll maybe tackle on the blockchain one, because from there the others derive. The blockchain, its aim was to establish trust within an ecosystem, and it started within the private sector, but then government level realized the benefits, the value of it. And use cases that we see governments extremely interested would be in digital identity and this evolution towards decentralized identity, where multiple stakeholders, government and private sector, are coming together to validate the credentials and to validate the claims. And depending on what type of services you would like to access, there'll be four stakeholders coming together to validate: the government, the tax administration, social security, and the banks, for example. So blockchain in terms of identity. Blockchain also has the potential to remove fraud, because when you blockchain, for example, VAT tax, all transactions are immutably stored in a decentralized ledger, so there's no opportunity for frauding. You would see all transactions, and the government will know how much to tax and to collect the revenue. And similarly, in terms of public procurement or economic stimulus packages, because we are working and we've run successful pilots with Inter-American Development Bank and even World Bank, vetting the beneficiary level and blockchain the requests and the claims. And once this is done, the access to funds happens much faster, because with the traditional mechanism of verifying, this can take months from the request to the funds transmission. When you blockchain it and you ensure the trust within the ecosystem, it will be minutes and maximum hours to get access to funds.
Thanks, Valentina. Alex, on any of those three questions?
Yeah. My comment on the first one regarding blockchain public procurement. In my opinion, if we are talking about public procurement and possibilities of blockchain technology, its notarization function is the main. In my opinion, I'm not an expert, yes, I'm really a lawyer by my background, but what I can see is that it's definitely notarization function. For example, PDF documents, we can really trust PDF documents if we have this blockchain technology in, so we can see any minor changes, that it's not an original document. And also, it might be very useful when we have any type of deadlines. And it's not only in public procurement, of course, it's also in, for example, some state aid requirements, when you have requirement of incentive effect. So that some works are not started before application. So I really see quite also easy way to use blockchain in public procurement. Of course, there might be a big discussion how also smart contracts might be used in public procurement, but it seems more difficult discussion. Regarding the second question about segregation of, let's say, high risky beneficiaries, if we are talking about EU funds, and less risky beneficiaries. So the question is not, let's say, about some discriminatory criteria or something. It's more where we invest our resources, our human resources. So will we check, for example, public procurement where there is small risk, or whether we will invest if we have there is no other option, or we will invest our time in high risk public procurement. So, of course, we have to invest time where the risks are high. You cannot always check everything. You shall have prioritization. And that is the main message we are talking about, some kind of risks in verification. And of course, we are trying to work always based on risks. And I see really that Fintech solutions, especially open data, so work with the open data can really help us to identify most risky areas, most risky, for example, procurements, or most risky even municipalities with the procurement. So if we see that in some municipalities there are really good level of competition and really different and also abroad, some companies from other member states, and in some municipality we see that there also always participate 3 competitors, and they have, for example, similar percentage of contracts, about 30%. All money is divided between them. Of course, it's high risk. So we have be much more much more go deeper when we are checking their procurements. Yeah. So that's the idea. And the third question was about preventative. Yes, it's a really good question. I like it a lot because, in my opinion, it also addresses to new European Court of Auditors report about blacklists. So it was issued just previous week, I believe. So European Court of Auditors paid attention that the blacklist mechanism is not really working in the EU, so also within European Commission. And in my opinion, it's signal that there might be really area for improvement if we are talking about preventive mechanisms. Of course, mostly in all cases when we are talking about fraud, it's almost always retrospective. So it's already happened, and then we are dealing with the result of the fraud, and we proceed with the investigation, or we cancel funding. But I believe that preventive work is very significant. I see like an idea also that EU funds or other funds, public funds, also might be a way how we promote other horizontal policy, for example, also ML policy. So we probably, artificial intelligence may check accountancy of the company who is willing to receive EU funds. And if there is some deficiencies found, we should think, are we giving them financing or not? Yeah. Or at least receive from them a justification about that. It's an example. We do not right now do anything, and also EU fund regulation doesn't foresee such check. But it's an idea how we can make policies together for the aim of the transparency in some fund project. Thanks, Alex. Jerome.
Yes, so I'll first take the third one because I think it's a very easy one. So I think preventative is definitely the way to go. So if you can prevent the money from going out, of course you don't have to chase the money later down the road. We see very often that once that the money has been paid out, it's super difficult to get it back, and you spend a lot of money prosecuting and still not getting money back. So you're spending money on money you've already lost. So the more you can do the closest to the event, the better. That will maximize your chances. And then the second question, and I think you mentioned, can we treat taxpayers differently? I think we need to be very careful with the words there. Because you don't want to treat the taxpayer differently. You need to be very careful when you have your models not to have a bias in your model. I mentioned that I didn't see any negative points of everything that was implemented during the COVID-19. Well, actually, I can think of one case that was very negative, where the models that were put into place in detecting risky individuals were highly biased towards certain ethnicities. So that is, of course, something you definitely don't want to have. And I think it's something you that's probably still an open discussion, but I believe that's something you can check proactively. Now, it's very difficult because of correlations and causations. So if I give you an example in the insurance sector of, yellow cars have more accidents, yellow cars are driven by young people. Now, can you really use the age of the person when defining your tariff, or is it a discrimination? Now, if you don't use the age of the person, but you use the color of the car, then indirectly you are still having a biased model. So in that case, maybe a good solution is to actually collect the age and make sure you're not having a bias in your model. So sometimes, even if it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but collecting more information and making sure you're not having a bias in your model, make sure that you treat everyone in a fair way, and that you're really more working on behaviors and on risks when targeting your taxpayers or beneficiaries.
Thanks, Jerome. I think that issue of potential bias in the systems is something that's getting increasing awareness now. So I think, as you say, people need to be really mindful of it and proactive approach to it. Ewan, we've got 1 minute left in this session, so over to you. I started with you, we'll finish with you on this one.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose, not much to add really to what sort of Valentina said on blockchain. I think understanding where money goes when it leaves the system is important. I think especially important now in the current climate of international links and ultimate beneficial owners. If you're actually giving someone money to deliver something, it's going there and not filtering out abroad, would be incredibly valuable at the moment. Certainly taxpayer segmentation, absolutely you wouldn't treat citizens differently. But if we can take steps to gather better data to manage risk accordingly and support departments and agencies with that, I think that should be encouraged. And absolutely to the space on preventative, again, it goes to managing your risk, creating your risk profile, and any steps that can be done to improve that. Ultimately, you'll make your grants or contracts more effective and efficient.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for our panellists here today, to Ewan, to Alex, to Valentina, and to Jerome. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. I'm sure we'll say a big thank you to them.